Claire sat in the living room, the soft hum of the clock on the wall blending into the silence. The air felt heavy, as if it could sense the weight of what had just unfolded. Across from her, her husband James sat stiffly on the edge of his seat. His expression, usually calm and collected, was now a mix of anger, disbelief, and hurt. "I just don't understand," James whispered, his voice barely audible, breaking the silence like a sharp blade. "Why?" Claire's hands trembled in her lap. She searched for the right words, but they didn't come. She had spent days preparing for this moment, but now, under his piercing gaze, her carefully rehearsed explanations seemed empty. I don't know what to say," Claire finally managed, tears pooling in her eyes. James let out a bitter laugh and looked away. "That's it? You don't know what to say? Claire, you hid this from me for months. You lied to me every day. And now that I know, all you can say is that you don't know." The accusation stung, but Claire knew he wasn't wrong. For the first time in their 12 years of marriage, she felt like a stranger in her own home. She wanted to reach for his hand, to beg for understanding, but she knew James wasn't ready for that. "How did we get here?" he asked, his voice breaking. I thought we were happy." The words sliced through Claire. They had been happy, or at least she thought they were, until everything started to unravel. She remembered how distant she'd become, how the wall she had built to protect herself from her own guilt had pushed James away. And now, here they were, their entire life together crumbling like a fragile house of cards. "I regret it, James," Claire said softly. "I made a terrible mistake, and I regret it every single day." James didn't respond. Instead, he stood up, walked to the door and grabbed his coat. Claire's heart sank as she realized what was coming next. "I need time," James said, his voice cold and detached. "I need space to figure out what I want." "James, please," Claire's voice cracked as she spoke. But James shook his head and walked out, leaving Claire alone in the empty house. The house that, without him, no longer felt like home. Claire sank onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. Regret burned deep within her. She had always thought she could fix things before they fell apart. But now, staring at the door James had just closed behind him, she realized she might have already lost him. And this time, she didn't know if he would come back. The house was quieter than ever. James had been gone for 3 days. Claire moved through the rooms, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Every space carried memories, some joyful, others now painful. The living room where they laughed at movies late into the night. The kitchen where they danced while cooking dinner. The hallway where James used to pull her into his arms after a long day. Now it all felt hollow. Claire sat at the dining table, a mug of tea going cold in front of her. She stared blankly at the phone, debating whether to call him. But what could she say that she hadn't already? "I just need space," James's voice replayed in her mind. Space. That's what he needed. So Claire gave it to him, though it killed her a little more each day. Her sister, Anna, called that evening. Claire picked up after the third ring, forcing her voice to sound steady. "Hey Claire. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," Claire lied. Anna sighed on the other end. "I know you're not. I heard from James." Claire froze. "He called you?" "Yes. He's staying at Mike's place." Mike was James's old college friend. "He's hurting, Claire. I won't sugarcoat it. He didn't say much, but I could hear it in his voice." Claire swallowed hard, her guilt tightening around her throat like a noose. "I don't know what to do, Anna. He won't talk to me. He just left." "Claire," Anna's voice softened. "You made a mistake, but you're not a bad person. You love him, right?" "More than anything," Claire whispered. "Then give him time. He needs to process this. When he's ready, he'll talk. But you have to be prepared for the outcome, whatever that is." The outcome? Claire's heart clenched at the thought. What if James couldn't forgive her? What if this was the end of everything they'd built together? After the call, Claire wandered into their bedroom. James's side of the bed was neatly made, as though he'd never been there. She pulled his sweatshirt, the one he always wore on lazy weekends, from the closet and held it close, breathing in the faint scent of him. It was a small comfort, but it was enough to break her. Sinking to the floor, Claire cried into the fabric, the weight of her regret finally spilling out. Meanwhile, at Mike's apartment, James sat alone on the balcony, staring out at the city lights. He clutched his phone in his hand, scrolling through old photos of him and Claire. Moments that now felt like they belonged to someone else. He wanted to call her. He wanted to yell, to ask her how she could betray him. But more than that, he wanted to hear her voice, to pretend, just for a moment, that nothing had changed. Instead, he put the phone down and stared at the night sky, a single thought running through his mind. Can we ever go back to what we were? Claire stared at the clock as another sleepless night melted into dawn. It had been a week since James left, and the silence in the house was deafening. She had tried to fill the void with distractions, cleaning rooms that didn't need cleaning, cooking meals she couldn't bring herself to eat, or scrolling through photos of happier times. But every task, every moment, reminded her of him. That morning, Claire made herself coffee and sat by the window, watching the world move on outside, while hers remained stuck in limbo. She picked up her phone, hesitating for a long moment before dialing. It rang several times, and just as she was about to give up, James's familiar voice answered. "Claire," he said, his tone cautious, as if he didn't know what to expect. Claire swallowed the lump in her throat. "James, I needed to hear your voice." He didn't reply immediately, and the silence cut her like a knife. Finally he spoke. "What do you want, Claire?" His voice wasn't angry, just tired. "I want to talk," Claire said softly. "Please, can we meet? Just once." James sighed, and she could almost see him running his hand through his hair, like he always did when he was frustrated. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." "Please, James," she whispered. "I know I don't deserve your time right now, but I need to see you, just to talk." After what felt like an eternity, he exhaled. "Fine. Tomorrow. I'll come by around noon. Don't expect much." The line went dead, and Claire clutched the phone to her chest, a mix of hope and fear coursing through her. He was coming back, if only for a conversation. It wasn't much, but it was something. The next day, Claire found herself staring at the clock again. Her hands shook as she cleaned the house for the third time that morning, making sure everything looked perfect. Why does it matter? She thought bitterly. James didn't care about clean counters or vacuumed floors. At exactly noon the doorbell rang. Claire's heart pounded as she opened the door to see James standing there. He looked different, tired, distant, yet seeing him filled her with both relief and sorrow. "Hi," Claire said softly, stepping aside to let him in. James walked in without a word, his gaze briefly sweeping across the familiar surroundings before settling on her. He didn't sit, didn't take off his coat. He just stood there guarded. Claire motioned to the couch. "Can we sit? Please?" He hesitated, then relented, lowering himself onto the far end of the couch. Claire sat at the other end, leaving a chasm between them. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then James broke the silence. "What do you want to say, Claire?" Her heart ached at how distant he sounded. She looked at him, the man she loved, the man whose trust she had broken, and for a moment, she couldn't find the words. "I want to say I'm sorry," Claire whispered finally, her voice trembling. "I know that's not enough, not even close. But I need you to know how deeply I regret everything I did." James's jaw tightened. "You keep saying that you regret it. But what does that even mean, Claire? Do you regret doing it? Or do you regret getting caught?" The question stung, but Claire had expected it. She looked down at her hands, wringing them together. "I regret everything. I regret every choice I made that hurt you. I regret pushing you away, when I should have held on tighter. I regret betraying the man who has always been my rock, my best friend." James's eyes softened for a moment, but he quickly looked away. "You didn't just hurt me, Claire. You shattered me. I've spent this last week trying to figure out if I can even look at you without seeing what you did." Claire felt tears building in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, James. Honestly, I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. But I want to fight for us, if you'll let me." James looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. There was pain in his eyes, but also something else, confusion, maybe even a flicker of hope. "I don't know what I want yet," James admitted, his voice quieter now. "I thought I knew everything about you. I thought I knew us. And now," he shook his head, "now I feel like I don't know anything at all." Claire's heart broke at his words, but she nodded. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. I won't give up on you, on us. James stood up, his expression unreadable. I can't make any promises, Claire. I know, she whispered. Without another word, James walked to the door. He paused for a brief moment, as if he wanted to say something, but then he left, closing the door behind him. Claire sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. The conversation hadn't gone perfectly, but he had come. And for now, that was enough to give her a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could piece together what had been broken. Days turned into weeks, and the ache in Claire's chest grew heavier with each passing moment. James hadn't called or texted since their brief meeting. The silence was unbearable, but she respected his need for space. She spent her days reflecting on everything, where it all went wrong, how she had hurt him, and what she would give to go back and undo it all. One afternoon, Claire sat at the kitchen table, staring at a small box she had found tucked away in their bedroom closet. It was a keepsake box James had given her on their 5th anniversary. Inside were handwritten notes he'd slipped into her purse, concert tickets from their favorite bands, and photographs. Proof of a life they had built with so much love. Tears welled up as she picked up a photo of them from a trip to the mountains. James had his arm around her, his smile wide and carefree. Back then, they had been inseparable, finishing each other's sentences, dreaming of growing old together. She wondered how she had let that slip away. The sudden ring of the doorbell startled her. Wiping her tears, Claire opened the door to find Anna standing there, holding 2 cups of coffee. Figured you could use this, Anna said with a soft smile, handing her 1 cup. Claire stepped aside to let her in. Thanks. Anna took a seat at the kitchen table, eyeing the box of memories in front of her sister. Still holding on, I see. Claire nodded, her voice barely a whisper. How could I not? This box is all I have left of him, of us. Anna sipped her coffee and leaned forward. Claire, I'm going to be honest with you. James is stubborn, but he's not unreachable. He's just hurt. You need to give him a reason to believe in you again. Claire looked up. How? I've apologized. I've told him how much I regret everything. What more can I do? Anna sighed. Words only go so far, Claire. James needs to see that you're willing to change, that you're ready to rebuild what's been broken, no matter how long it takes. Claire sat quietly, processing her sister's words. I don't even know if he wants that. You won't know until you try, Anna said firmly. Sitting here crying over the past isn't going to fix it. You've got to show him that you're still the woman he fell in love with. That evening, Claire pulled out an old journal from the nightstand. It had been a gift from James on their first Christmas together, with his note written on the first page. Fill this with the moments that matter most to you. Claire opened to a blank page and started writing. Dear James, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to say it anyway. I've been looking back on us, on all the good, the bad, and everything in between. And I can see so clearly now what I let slip away. I let my own fears and insecurities push you aside when you were the one person I could always count on. I know words can't undo what I did. I know I hurt you, and I'll carry that regret with me forever. But I need you to know that I haven't given up on us. I'll spend every day proving to you that I can be better, that I can earn back your trust, if you'll let me. You've always said love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up even when it's hard. I'm here, James. And I'm not going anywhere. Yours always, Claire. She closed the journal, tears streaking her face, and set it on the nightstand beside his empty pillow. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the first step toward something real. That same night, miles away at Mike's apartment, James sat alone again, his thoughts a tangled mess. He couldn't stop thinking about Claire. The way her voice had cracked when she'd asked him to stay. The look in her eyes when she said she regretted everything. He wanted to stay angry. Anger was easier. But beneath it all was a deeper pain. A longing for the woman he had loved for so many years. A part of him still wondered if they could ever find their way back to each other. As James stared at his phone, his finger hovered over Claire's name. After a long pause, he set the phone down and leaned back against the couch, closing his eyes. For the first time since he had walked out, he wasn't sure if letting go was the right choice. James stood outside his apartment, staring at his phone as he read the message Claire had sent him late last night. He had received it hours ago, but hadn't been able to bring himself to respond. The words were simple yet profound, filled with vulnerability and remorse. Claire's message wasn't a plea for forgiveness, but rather a promise. "I'm here, James. I'm not going anywhere." It was a promise he wasn't sure he could accept. He had spent the last few weeks wrestling with his emotions, trying to navigate the overwhelming pain of betrayal, while still holding on to the love that had once felt so effortless. Claire's words echoed in his mind. She wasn't perfect, but neither was he. The difference was, he hadn't broken her trust the way she had broken his. Yet, as much as he wanted to stay angry, a part of him wanted to believe her. A part of him still saw the woman he had once shared everything with. The woman who had been his rock, his equal, and the one he had imagined growing old with. James sighed, his thumb hovering over the screen of his phone. He hesitated for a long moment before typing a single sentence. "Can we talk?" As soon as he hit send, a wave of anxiety washed over him. He didn't know if he was ready for this. But a part of him, no, a deep aching part, knew that he had to at least try. The next day, Claire sat in the living room, her nerves frazzled as she anxiously glanced at the clock. She had almost given up on hearing from James when her phone buzzed. It was a message from him. "Can we talk?" Her heart skipped a beat. The word she had longed for, the connection she thought was lost, was suddenly there. She could barely hold back the tears. She immediately typed back, "Yes. I'll be home in an hour." For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. When James arrived at her doorstep, Claire opened the door slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. His eyes were still guarded, but there was something different in them now. A shift, a sign that maybe he was beginning to let his walls down. "Hi," Claire said softly, her voice trembling. James gave a small nod and stepped inside. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The silence hung between them like a thick fog. Finally, James broke it. "I don't know where to start," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know if I even should be here, but I couldn't stay away." Claire's breath caught in her throat, but she managed a faint smile. "I'm glad you're here." They both sat down on the couch, the space between them smaller now, but still significant. Claire could feel the tension in the air. But there was also something else, an unspoken understanding that this conversation, no matter how painful, was a necessary step forward. "I've thought a lot about everything," James began, his voice quieter now. "And I've come to realize that I've been holding on to anger. Anger at you, at myself, at everything. But I'm starting to see that maybe, just maybe, I was too quick to shut you out." Claire's heart raced. She leaned forward, her eyes filled with both hope and uncertainty. "James, I know I hurt you. I can't undo that. But I want to make it right. I'll do whatever it takes. You don't have to forgive me right away. But I just want a chance to prove that I can be better. For you, for us." James looked at her for a long moment, his gaze softening. "I don't know if I can forgive you right now, Claire. But I'm willing to try." The words hung in the air between them, filled with the weight of both fear and possibility. For the first time in a long while, Claire felt something stir deep inside her. Hope. It wasn't a promise, and it wasn't a guarantee. But it was a step in the right direction. The next few days were difficult, filled with hard conversations, moments of doubt, and shared tears. But slowly, Claire and James began to rebuild what had been shattered. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but they were learning to communicate again, to trust each other with their vulnerabilities. They both knew it wouldn't be a quick fix. It would take time. Time to heal, time to grow, and time to learn how to love each other in a way that honored both their flaws and their strengths. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, James turned to Claire. "I can't promise that everything will be the same as it was before, but I can promise that I'm willing to try. We'll take it one day at a time." Claire smiled through her tears. "That's all I'm asking for." The days grew longer, and Claire found herself waking up with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. Each day, she worked to rebuild not just her relationship with James, but also the trust they had lost. There were setbacks, moments when the old pain resurfaced, and silence would fall between them. But each time, they slowly learned how to navigate it together as a team. Claire had started journaling again, pouring her thoughts and emotions onto paper every night. It was her way of processing the complexity of their journey. There were days when the words came easily, when she could see their progress and feel a renewed connection with James. But other days, she struggled with doubt, questioning whether they were simply forcing something that could never truly be fixed. One evening, as Claire sat at the kitchen table, her pen paused above the page. The question she had been asking herself for weeks still lingered. Is this enough? Was it enough to heal the wounds she had caused? To restore a love that had been fractured beyond recognition? The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to see James standing in the doorway. His expression was soft, but there was something different in his eyes. I was thinking, James began, his voice hesitant but steady. Maybe we should take a trip. Just the two of us. A weekend away. No distractions, no pressure, just time to reconnect. What do you think? Claire looked up at him, surprised. She hadn't expected such a suggestion. The thought of being alone with him, in a place away from everything that had happened, felt both comforting and intimidating. But beneath the fear, there was a flicker of hope. I think that sounds like a good idea, she said quietly, her heart swelling. It had been a long time since they had done something spontaneous, something just for them. And while the trip wouldn't magically solve everything, it felt like a step toward something new, something they both needed. A few days later, they were on their way to a small cabin in the mountains, away from the chaos of their everyday lives. The drive was quiet at first, but as they entered the peaceful countryside, the tension between them began to dissipate. They shared stories, laughed over old memories, and slowly, the walls they had built between them began to crumble. When they arrived at the cabin, the air was crisp and fresh, the kind of air that felt like a fresh start. The scenery was breathtaking. Snow-capped mountains surrounding a tranquil lake, the silence only broken by the occasional chirp of birds. It was the perfect place to reflect, to just be without the weight of the world on their shoulders. They spent the evening by the fireplace, sipping hot chocolate, and talking about everything that had happened. No judgment, no anger, just honesty. It was the first time in months that they felt like they were truly communicating, no barriers between them. I've missed this, Claire admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've missed us. James looked at her, his eyes soft. I've missed us too. I'm sorry for how I've been. I've been so angry, Claire. But I'm starting to see that holding on to that anger isn't helping anyone. Claire reached for his hand, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. I know. And I'm sorry for everything. I don't want to hurt you anymore. James squeezed her hand gently. You don't have to apologize anymore. We're in this together, okay? We're taking it one day at a time, but we're moving forward. That's all I can ask for. For the first time in a long while, Claire felt a sense of peace wash over her. There was no rushing, no expectations, just a shared understanding that they were both trying. And that was enough. The weekend passed by in a blur of quiet conversations, nature walks, and peaceful moments that reminded them of the love they still had for each other. When it was time to leave, neither of them wanted to go back to the noise of the world, but they knew it was time. As they packed the car, James turned to Claire. I think this trip helped more than I realized. I can't promise that everything will be easy, but I do know one thing. I'm willing to fight for us. Claire smiled through her tears. I'm ready to fight too. We're not giving up. And with that, they drove back home. Together. Not as they were before, but as something new, something stronger. They didn't have all the answers. And the road ahead would still be difficult at times. But they knew they had each other. And that was enough. The months following their weekend away felt like a slow, steady transformation. It wasn't immediate, and there were still moments where the past would creep in. Memories of old arguments, long silences, and unspoken pain. But there was something different now. Something had shifted between Claire and James. They were no longer just holding on to the remnants of a broken relationship. They were actively rebuilding it, brick by brick, with patience, trust, and love. Claire continued with her journaling, capturing the small victories and setbacks that marked their healing process. Some days, it was a simple conversation over dinner, where they listened without interruption. Other days, it was the quiet comfort of sitting together on the couch, their hands intertwined, both content in the shared silence. James, too, had found his own way of processing the events. He began taking small steps, revisiting his old passions, spending time with friends he hadn't seen in a while, and most importantly, learning to forgive himself. For a long time, he had blamed himself for not seeing the warning signs, for allowing his own pain to close him off from Claire. But over time, he realized that healing wasn't just about forgiveness from others. It was also about forgiving himself. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, James turned to Claire with a smile that was more genuine than she had seen in a long time. "I've been thinking," he said softly, "about how far we've come. We're not where we want to be yet, but we're not where we were either." Claire smiled back, her eyes glistening with the weight of everything they had been through. "We're not perfect, but we're trying. And that's what matters." James nodded, taking her hand. "I think we're going to be okay. I think we're going to be more than okay." Claire squeezed his hand, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'm so glad you're here. I'm glad we're still here." There was a quiet moment, as they both let the peace of their surroundings settle in. The world seemed to slow down, as if giving them a chance to breathe, to appreciate the moment. They had been through so much, but they had made it through together. And that was a victory in itself. The next few months were filled with milestones. Claire and James celebrated their anniversary quietly, reflecting on everything they had overcome. They started new traditions, small meaningful moments that reminded them of how far they had come. They were no longer just trying to survive. They were learning how to thrive, how to love each other again in new and deeper ways. One afternoon, while they were walking through the park hand in hand, James stopped and turned to Claire with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," he said. "I know we've been taking it one day at a time, but I want to know if you're ready for the next step. I'm not asking you to forget what happened, but I want to build a future with you. I want to make new memories. What do you say?" Claire's heart skipped a beat. For so long, she had been uncertain, afraid of taking that next step in fear of repeating past mistakes. But looking at James, looking at the man who was still standing by her side despite everything, she realized something. She was ready. "I'm ready," she said, her voice full of emotion. "I want that too. I want to move forward with you." James smiled, pulling her into a hug. The future, once uncertain and clouded with doubt, now seemed full of possibility. Their journey had been far from easy, but they had both grown in ways they hadn't thought possible. The heartbreak they had endured had turned into something beautiful, an opportunity for growth, for understanding, and for an even deeper connection. As they stood together on that quiet evening, the sky painted with hues of orange and pink, Claire and James knew that while their past would always be a part of them, it didn't have to define their future. Together, they had found closure, not in forgetting the pain, but in learning to live with it and move forward stronger than before. And as they faced the road ahead, hand in hand, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together.